This story is titled, My Brother-in-Law Laughed and Mocked Me as a Loser at the Family Party, humiliating me in front of everyone. But when they told him who I really was, my phone blew up with 12 missed calls from him the next day. Hey everyone, I'm 30 years old and living a life that most of my family doesn't know about. Last week, I received an unusually fancy invitation in the mail. A cream-colored envelope with gold trim that practically reeked of wealth and pretentiousness. It was from my Aunt Vivian, the self-appointed matriarch of our extended family, announcing one of her grand reunions at her massive estate. I haven't attended one of these gatherings in years. Work keeps me busy, but if I'm being completely honest with myself, I never saw much point in going. These family reunions aren't really about reconnecting with relatives or sharing meaningful moments together. They're competitions, subtle and not so subtle displays of who has the best job, who owns the biggest house, and who drives the most expensive car. It's exhausting. My professional life is actually quite successful. I run a cybersecurity company specializing in data protection for medium-sized businesses. What started as a small operation after I left my corporate job has grown considerably since we secured some big contracts. But no one in my family knows about my success. They all assume I'm barely scraping by, probably hopping from one insignificant gig to another without any real career trajectory. I've never bothered to correct them because, frankly, I don't care what they think. I'm not interested in their approval or in participating in the exhausting games they play. Growing up in my family was always about appearances and achievements. Most of my cousins followed predictable paths: law, medicine, finance, those traditional careers that look impressive on paper and provide plenty of material for bragging rights at family gatherings. And then there's Vincent, the golden boy of the family. He's the one everyone measures themselves against. A corporate lawyer with a perfect resume who's always been arrogant. His attitude has only gotten worse over the years, especially after I decided not to follow the traditional career route. I still remember what Vincent said to me the last time we spoke. Not everyone is cut out for success. He delivered this with a laugh, as if he were simply stating an objective fact about my life choices. I never responded to his taunts. They weren't worth the effort. My parents, unlike the rest of the family, actually know about my professional success. They've been urging me to attend this reunion, insisting that it's time I showed them all. I've had no interest in proving anything to anyone, but after their persistent nudging, I finally gave in. Fine, I'd go. Show up, sit through the usual passive-aggressive conversations, and then leave without any drama. That was the plan anyway. The reunion was set at my aunt's sprawling estate, a mansion that screamed old money with its marble floors and grand chandeliers. Staff in formal attire moved throughout the space, serving drinks on silver trays as if this were some kind of royal gathering rather than a family event. I arrived in my regular car. Nothing flashy or attention-grabbing. In contrast, most of my family members pulled up in luxury vehicles, stepping out in tailored suits and designer dresses that probably cost more than some people's monthly rent. A few relatives glanced my way as I walked in, offering half-hearted greetings before quickly moving on to more important conversations. No surprise there. I'd never been considered noteworthy in this crowd. Dinner was held in a grand dining hall with long tables set with expensive china that probably hadn't seen actual use outside of these special occasions. The conversation flowed exactly as I had expected. Promotions at prestigious firms, successful investments, extravagant vacations to exotic locations. It was the same performative display of success that these gatherings always devolved into. Vincent was in his element, holding court with a group of cousins who hung on his every word as if he were dispensing rare wisdom instead of the same self-aggrandizing stories he always told. It didn't take long before he turned his attention to me, probably because I was the easiest target in the room. "So," he said, swirling his wine glass in that pretentious way people do when they think they're sophisticated. "You still struggling to pay rent, or have you finally found a real job?" A few chuckles followed his remark. No one outright laughed. That would be too obvious. But no one stepped in to stop him either. That's how things worked in this family. Mockery disguised as casual conversation, with everyone pretending it was all in good fun. I didn't react to his comment. I never did. "I'm doing all right," I said simply, pouring myself some water instead of engaging with his game. Vincent smirked, taking my non-reaction as confirmation of his assumptions. "That's just another way of saying no," he replied. "You know, I could help you out if you need connections. It's never too late to start over." I merely shrugged, which only made him bolder. With a few drinks in him, Vincent's voice grew louder, ensuring that more of the family could hear his assessment of my life choices. "See, this is what happens when people don't take their careers seriously," he announced to the table at large. "Not everyone can be successful. Some people just, well, you know." The room went quiet. Even my aunt, who usually encouraged these little social battles as a form of entertainment, seemed uncomfortable with how far Vincent was pushing. My parents looked furious, but they knew better than to start something in this setting. I remained calm. I always did. Then my younger cousin, probably the only person there without some kind of social agenda, turned to me with genuine curiosity. "What do you actually do?" she asked. I kept my answer simple. "I work in tech," I said. "I do pretty well." Vincent scoffed loudly from across the table. "That's just code for unemployed," he declared, triggering more chuckles and a few exchanged glances around the table, some amused, others pitying. Vincent leaned back in his chair, his expression completely smug as he delivered what he thought was the finishing blow. "Man, I hope you're at least saving up," he said. "Maybe in a few years, you'll finally be able to buy a house." I could have said a lot of things in that moment. I could have told them about my business, the investments, the multiple properties I already owned. But where was the fun in that? Instead, I simply smirked and replied, "If you really think that, I guess we'll see." Vincent laughed, thinking he'd won this round of our ongoing one-sided rivalry. I just let him think that. This was going to be interesting. The morning after the dinner, I woke up early and went downstairs for breakfast. My parents were already there, sitting at a large dining table filled with just about every breakfast option imaginable. Fresh fruit, pastries, and a full spread that showcased my aunt's need to impress even at the earliest hours. Most of the family hadn't come down yet, but I could hear voices drifting in from the next room. Vincent was there, loud as ever, holding court with a few uncles who seemed content to let him dominate the conversation. He was bragging about his latest courtroom victory, something about a high-profile corporate case that only someone with real skill could have handled. The way he talked, you'd think he had personally rewritten the entire legal system single-handedly. I ate quietly while my parents exchanged knowing glances. They didn't say anything, but I could tell they were waiting for something to happen. My father sipped his coffee, clearly enjoying the show unfolding in the next room. Then my uncle, the investor in the family, started talking about a tech startup he had been following. He mentioned how impressed he was with how fast it had grown and said it was on track for a massive expansion soon. I kept eating, not saying a word, even though I knew exactly which company he was talking about. Vincent, of course, didn't miss a chance to throw in his opinion. He dismissed the entire tech industry as overhyped, claiming that most startups were just lucky flukes that burned out in a few years. He had no idea the company my uncle was talking about was mine. Not long after, Vincent started making his usual passive-aggressive comments. Some remark about how some people wasted their potential by chasing pointless dreams instead of securing a stable career. No names were mentioned, but it was obvious who he was talking about. A few minutes later, Vincent and some of the older cousins started organizing a golf outing, their usual networking activity, a chance to show off, make connections, and talk business. Vincent made it clear I wasn't invited, though he played it off casually, saying it was more of a professional gathering, nothing I would find interesting. I didn't care. I wasn't interested in spending a whole day listening to them stroke each other's egos, but I decided to tag along anyway, just to watch the show that was about to unfold. At the golf course, Vincent was in his element. He was bragging about all the high-level people he knew, dropping names, exaggerating stories, and acting like he was the most important person there. Everything was going as usual, exactly as I had expected, until an unexpected guest arrived. During the conversation, one of my investors, a well-known business executive who happened to be on the same course, spotted me from a distance. He gave me a nod of recognition before casually mentioning how well my company was doing during an industry discussion that caught my family's attention. He mentioned how excited he was about our upcoming expansion and hinted at some major deals in the works. Vincent froze. He didn't say a word at first, just stared like he couldn't process what was happening. The rest of the group went silent too. They weren't used to seeing someone important giving me that kind of recognition. Then the questions started. My uncle, who had barely paid attention to me the night before, suddenly perked up. They all started asking about my company, my work, what exactly I did. I kept my answers simple, didn't brag, didn't try to prove anything, just gave them the facts. But the more I talked, the more interested they became. Vincent, still trying to hold on to some sense of control, attempted to brush it off. He said startups fail all the time, that success in tech is mostly luck, and that it was nothing compared to a stable, prestigious career like his. I let him talk then, casually. I mentioned my company's valuation. The number was in the millions. The entire group went silent. A few people looked genuinely shocked, while others tried to hide their reactions. My uncle, the investor, nodded slowly, clearly reevaluating everything he had assumed about me. The executive, still standing next to me, added another detail. He confirmed that my company was growing fast, had serious backing, and was projected to double in value soon. He even mentioned that other investors were eager to get in before it was too late. Vincent's face turned red. He looked like he had just been punched in the gut. For the first time in our long history of one-sided confrontations, he had absolutely nothing to say. My parents stayed quiet, but I caught my father smirking behind his coffee cup. My mother simply folded her hands in her lap, looking completely at peace with the situation. No one said anything for a long moment. Then one of my uncles cleared his throat and changed the subject, but the energy had shifted dramatically. Vincent wasn't the center of attention anymore, and he knew it. Later that night, the atmosphere at the family gathering had changed dramatically. Conversations that used to revolve around real estate investments and law firm promotions had shifted in a new direction. More relatives were coming up to me, asking about my company, my work, and how I got started. Some were genuinely curious, while others were clearly kicking themselves for not taking me seriously before. Vincent, on the other hand, was still trying desperately to regain control of the narrative. He made offhand remarks about tech startups being unstable, how most of them crash within a few years, and how real wealth comes from established industries. He threw in a few stories about failed startups he had read about, subtly trying to paint a picture that my success was temporary at best, but it wasn't working. His usual confidence had a slight edge of frustration now. The same people who used to nod along when he talked were now more interested in what I had to say. A couple of my uncles even started asking if I had investment opportunities open, completely ignoring Vincent's attempts to steer the conversation back to himself. Vincent tried to regain the spotlight by mentioning his latest big case, but the excitement just wasn't there anymore. He was still respected, but no longer idolized the way he used to be. The family dynamic had shifted, and he could feel it slipping through his fingers. Then came the moment that changed everything. One of my younger cousins, who had been quiet most of the night, suddenly asked Vincent point-blank, "How much do you make a year?" Vincent didn't hesitate to answer, proudly giving the number, expecting the usual admiration his salary disclosure typically generated. Before anyone could respond, another relative who had been listening closely all evening casually remarked, "That's probably what his company makes in a month." The silence that followed was deafening. Vincent laughed, but it was forced. A tight, uncomfortable chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. His fiancée, who had been sitting beside him, shifted slightly, pressing her lips together like she wished she were anywhere else. A few people exchanged glances. Someone tried to move the conversation forward, but Vincent wasn't letting it go. He leaned forward, making sure everyone heard him as he insisted that most of my company's success must have come from investors, that I was probably just lucky to be in the right place at the right time. That was when the investor, the same executive from earlier, spoke up again. Actually, he built this company from the ground up. He's one of the sharpest business minds I've seen. Another silence fell over the room. This time, it wasn't awkward. It was a moment of collective realization. I could see it happening. The shift in perception. Family members who had dismissed me before started to show more interest, asking casual questions about my work. A few were still skeptical, but the dynamic had noticeably changed. The way they looked at me was different, as if they were finally seeing me for the first time. Vincent's face was flushed red. He barely held it together before suddenly standing up, muttering something about needing to check emails and leaving the gathering without another word. His fiancée hesitated for a second before quietly following him. As soon as they were out of sight, the whispers started. A couple of my aunts exchanged knowing looks. One of them muttered that Vincent had always been like this. Another relative, someone who had once hung on to his every word, shook her head and said, "I never realized how arrogant he was." I didn't react. I didn't have to. A little later, while I was getting a drink, Vincent's fiancée approached me. She looked hesitant, but serious as she apologized for Vincent's behavior, saying he wasn't handling things well. She admitted that he had always felt superior to me, and that seeing the family's reaction tonight had shaken him more than he would ever admit. I didn't gloat. I just shrugged and told her, "It's fine. He'll figure things out eventually." That night, Vincent didn't show up again, but I overheard some cousins talking in hushed voices, saying he had been venting to them. He was still trying to convince himself that my success wasn't real, that it was overhyped and not sustainable. The same excuses people make when they realize they bet on the wrong horse. The next morning, one of my relatives posted a subtle social media update about the reunion. Nothing too obvious, but the message was clear. Something about how some people should be careful who they underestimate. The comments started rolling in, some lighthearted, others a little sharper. But one thing was obvious. Vincent wasn't the one people were admiring anymore. Vincent showed up to breakfast the next morning looking exhausted. His usual confidence was replaced with something more controlled, like he was trying to keep himself in check. He didn't acknowledge me directly or say anything to me, but his irritation was obvious in every tense movement and forced smile. While I sat with my parents, casually sipping my coffee, I caught sight of Vincent off to the side, speaking in hushed tones with a few older relatives. It was clear he was working on damage control, probably trying to spin a new version of events that would preserve his ego. There were a few nods, some murmured agreements. It didn't take much to see where this was going. As the morning progressed, the divide in the family became more noticeable. Some of my relatives, particularly the younger ones, were openly impressed by my success. They asked more questions, genuinely interested in my work and achievements. A couple of uncles who had always put Vincent on a pedestal had shifted their approach too, suddenly acting like they had always believed in me. But then there were the others, the ones who had always sided with Vincent. They weren't outright hostile, but they made their opinions known in subtle ways. "Money does not equal respect," one of them muttered at the table. Another made a comment about how real success is about legacy, not numbers. Then, Vincent's mother got involved. She was never outright rude, but she had a way of making passive-aggressive comments sound polite and reasonable. She talked about how humility is more important than wealth, and how some people lose sight of what really matters. She never said my name, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew exactly who she was referring to. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Vincent's fiancée sat next to him, looking increasingly uncomfortable. She wasn't speaking much, mostly just picking at her food while Vincent kept throwing out backhanded comments. It was clear that last night had rattled him, and he was still grasping for a way to regain control of the situation. Then, without warning, Vincent snapped. He turned toward me, his voice sharp enough to cut through the room's chatter. He accused me of hiding my success, of deliberately keeping it a secret just to make the family look foolish. He demanded to know why I never mentioned anything, why I let everyone believe I was struggling when in reality I was doing better than most of them. I set my cup down, let the silence stretch for a moment, then simply said, "You embarrassed yourself." A few people inhaled sharply. Vincent's jaw clenched visibly. Then an uncle, one of the few in the family who had never really taken sides, spoke up. He leaned back in his chair, looked Vincent straight in the eye and said, "Jealous of what? He is doing better than all of us." Vincent's entire argument crumbled right there. He tried to recover, to spin it again, but the shift in the room was undeniable. Some of the same people he had been whispering to earlier were now avoiding eye contact. No one was nodding along anymore. The weight of the moment was sinking in for everyone. In a final desperate attempt, Vincent scoffed and said, "Let's see where you are in 5 years." I shrugged. "I'll be fine. I have investments ensuring financial stability for decades." And then finally, his fiancée snapped. She turned to him, her voice sharp with frustration, and told him to stop embarrassing himself. The entire room went silent. Vincent's face darkened. He didn't argue, didn't try to defend himself. Instead, he pushed his chair back, stood up, and left the table without another word. Later that afternoon, a cousin pulled me aside with an amused look. Apparently, Vincent had been going around, asking different relatives if they really knew what my business was about. He was fishing for anything he could use against me, trying to find some angle to discredit my success. No one took the bait. If anything, they found his desperate attempts entertaining. Then, a few hours later, Vincent made a vague post on social media. Something about how some people think money makes them better, but real success is about respect and legacy. It didn't mention me by name, but it didn't need to. The timing made it obvious who he was referring to. The post got a few polite likes, mostly from the same relatives who had always sided with him, but no one engaged with it in any meaningful way. A few family members even shared unrelated posts right after, effectively pushing his bitter message out of view. It was clear that most people weren't interested in entertaining his narrative anymore. As the evening rolled in, I stepped outside for some fresh air and a moment of quiet away from the family drama. That was when Vincent found me. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. His face was tense, and his voice was low, like he was barely holding himself together. He accused me of turning the family against him, of deliberately making him look like a fool in front of everyone. I just looked at him and said, "You did that yourself." That was it. No argument, no debate, just the simple truth. He stared at me for a moment, like he was waiting for me to say more, to give him something he could fight against. When I didn't, he turned and walked off, muttering something under his breath. Not long after, my father called a family meeting. It wasn't anything formal, just a gathering in the main living room where most of the relatives were already sitting and chatting. The growing tension had become too obvious to ignore, and my father decided to address it directly. Vincent tried to play the victim. He claimed I had humiliated him first, that I had been hiding my success just to embarrass him. He looked around the room, waiting for support, but he didn't get it. One of my aunts shook her head and reminded everyone that Vincent had been mocking me for years. Another uncle pointed out how Vincent had been the one making dismissive comments about startups and acting like I was some kind of failure. A few younger cousins laughed, saying it was funny how Vincent could dish it out, but couldn't take it when the tables were turned. Vincent's parents jumped in, trying to defend him. His mother insisted that he was being misunderstood, that he was just feeling pressured because the family was suddenly changing how they saw things. But no one was buying it anymore. The years of watching Vincent's behavior had finally caught up to him. Then came the real blow. His fiancée, who had been sitting quietly during most of this confrontation, finally spoke up. She looked exhausted, like she had been holding something back for too long. And then she said it. She needed some space. The room went completely silent. Vincent stiffened visibly. He looked at her, then at the family, then back at her. He opened his mouth to say something, but seemed to think better of it. Instead, he just nodded, turned around, and walked out of the room without another word. Within an hour, Vincent was gone. He packed up his things and left the reunion early, not bothering to say goodbye to anyone. A few relatives tried to act like it was no big deal, but the whispers started almost immediately. People were speculating about his engagement. Some thought the relationship wouldn't last. Others just shook their heads, saying they never realized how fragile Vincent's ego really was. The next morning, I found out Vincent had unfollowed me on every social media platform. No messages, no final words, just a quiet attempt to erase me from his digital life. I wasn't surprised. With Vincent gone, the rest of the reunion was actually enjoyable. The tension had lifted, and for the first time in years, the gathering didn't feel like a competition. Conversations flowed easily, laughter came naturally, and people started treating each other like family instead of rivals. It was ironic. Vincent had always wanted to be the center of attention, the one everyone looked up to. But the moment he left, things got better for everyone. With him gone, the atmosphere at the reunion shifted entirely. Conversations were lighter. People were actually enjoying themselves. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel like a constant competition. A few relatives even joked about how much more peaceful everything was without him there. At one point, Vincent's fiancée found me again, looking more frustrated than before. She admitted that his behavior over the past few months had been making her reconsider their future, and the reunion had only confirmed her doubts. She had always known he had an ego, but seeing how he dismissed and undermined others, even in front of family, made her realize how much of a problem it really was. The mask had finally slipped, and she was seeing the real Vincent clearly for the first time. By the time the reunion wrapped up, the gossip had spread throughout the extended family. Word got around that after leaving, Vincent had a full meltdown at his parents' house. He had argued with them, furious that they didn't defend him more aggressively. Apparently, he felt betrayed that the family didn't rally behind him the way they used to in the past. Despite everything that had happened, Vincent never reached out to me. There was no apology, no attempt to smooth things over, just radio silence. If anything, it seemed like he doubled down on his bitterness rather than reflecting on his behavior. A week later, more news came in through the family grapevine. Vincent's fiancée had officially ended their engagement. She cited his ego problem as the main reason, saying she couldn't be with someone who was more obsessed with his own image than the people around him. The conversation we'd had at the reunion had apparently been just the beginning of her realization about their relationship. Then a cousin who worked in the legal field mentioned that Vincent had gotten into an argument at work. He had lashed out at a colleague and ended up getting written up by his firm. It wasn't a huge career-ending scandal, But it was another crack in the perfect image he had built for himself over the years. His reputation within the family crumbled surprisingly fast. The same relatives who once saw him as the family's golden boy were now keeping their distance. Some of them even admitted they had always found him a little exhausting but never said anything before. It was as if one crack in his facade had given everyone permission to acknowledge what they'd secretly thought all along. His parents, on the other hand, were furious about the whole situation. They tried to shift the blame onto me, claiming that I had set him up to look bad on purpose. But no one was buying their excuses anymore. The reality was too obvious. Vincent had done it to himself through years of arrogance and condescension. Privately, my parents admitted they were proud of how everything had unfolded. My father, usually the quiet one, actually smirked and said he enjoyed watching me finally put Vincent in his place. My mother just nodded, saying it had been a long time coming. They had watched me endure his comments for years and were glad to see the tables finally turn. Meanwhile, Vincent tried to salvage what he could of his reputation. He unfollowed nearly every family member who had sided with me during the reunion, and suddenly started posting about humility and learning from mistakes. He even rebranded himself online, talking about personal growth and becoming a better person. No one bought it. The sudden transformation was too transparent, too obviously reactive to be genuine. While Vincent's world was shrinking, mine was expanding. My company finalized a major partnership, and the deal was publicly announced, gaining a lot of attention in the industry. Some of the same relatives who once dismissed me were now reaching out, asking for business advice or trying to establish connections. It was amazing how quickly their perception had changed once the family's golden boy had fallen from grace. A few weeks later, another family gathering was held, a smaller affair for a cousin's birthday. This time, Vincent wasn't invited. No one even suggested including him. As I looked around at the people laughing, chatting, and actually enjoying themselves without walking on eggshells, it became crystal clear. He had spent years trying to control how the family saw him. But in the end, the only thing he had really controlled was his own downfall. The best revenge wasn't proving anything to him directly. It was simply succeeding and moving forward with my life while he remained stuck in his bitterness. Vincent's downfall wasn't loud or dramatic. It was slow, messy, and completely self-inflicted. After being ignored by most of the family, he turned to social media as his outlet. He started posting vague messages about fake people and how family is supposed to be supportive. The bitterness was obvious to anyone who read between the lines. He never mentioned me directly, but anyone who had been at the reunion knew exactly who he was talking about. At first, some relatives reacted to Vincent's social media posts by trying to remain neutral. A few left supportive comments, not wanting to completely abandon him. But as he kept going, posting about how people change when money is involved and how real success isn't about wealth but character, even those supportive comments started disappearing. He was making it painfully clear that he had no intention of letting this go, and people were getting tired of his one-man pity party. Relatives who once admired him started quietly distancing themselves. Aunts and uncles who had always taken his side stopped engaging with his content. Even a few cousins who used to be close to him stopped liking his posts altogether. No one wanted to be associated with whatever this bitter spiral was turning into. Then the professional fallout started to intensify. The cousin who worked in the legal field mentioned that Vincent had been butting heads with more colleagues recently. His confidence, once seen as an asset in the courtroom, had started rubbing people the wrong way. There were murmurs that he needed to dial back his attitude. It wasn't a good look, especially for someone at his level of seniority. On top of that, he had been clashing with senior partners, pushing back against any feedback, acting like he was untouchable. Word was spreading that the firm was now considering letting him go, something that would have been unthinkable just months ago when he was at the height of his professional reputation. In a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative, Vincent tried reaching out to some family members, looking for sympathy. He called a few uncles, trying to spin the situation in his favor, making it seem like he was the real victim in all of this. But most of them had already moved on. Some ignored him completely, while others gave vague, non-committal responses before changing the subject. He wasn't getting the reaction he wanted anymore. Then he tried a different angle. He contacted my parents, telling them they needed to talk to me and convince me to stop making him look bad. He insisted that I had embarrassed him in front of the entire family, and that I needed to fix things. My parents didn't entertain his delusions for a second. They told him bluntly that I hadn't done anything to him. He had done it all to himself. That was when I got an email from him. Vincent sent me a message with a subject line that simply read, "We need to talk." The body of the email was a long, rambling explanation of how things had gotten out of hand and how we should clear the air between us. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of anything he had done, just an attempt to reset things on his terms, as if he could control this situation, like he had controlled so many others. I responded with one sentence. "Vincent, your problems are not my responsibility." That was the last time he tried to contact me directly, but the hits kept coming for him. Word spread that his former fiancée had moved on and started dating someone else. People who had seen her recently said she looked much happier than she ever had with Vincent. That news alone seemed to set him off because soon after, he started demanding she return the engagement ring. She refused, telling him that the ring was a gift and it was hers to keep. That only made him angrier, and he started ranting about how she had betrayed him. By then, she wasn't listening anymore. She had already blocked him on everything. His mother tried one last time to shift the blame. She started telling relatives that I had ruined Vincent's life, that my success had made him look bad, that I had humiliated him in front of the family. But no one was buying it anymore. Everyone had seen the way he had acted at the reunion. There was nothing left to defend. Then came a serious setback for Vincent. One of his biggest clients decided not to renew their contract with his firm. A cousin mentioned that Vincent's increasingly combative attitude at work had started raising serious concerns, and his firm was keeping a closer eye on him. Losing a client that important sent a clear message to the partners. It wasn't just a personal issue anymore, it was affecting business. Rumors started circulating that his boss was planning to fire him. At this point, even Vincent seemed to realize things were falling apart. He made one last vague social media post about how some people only care about money. Unlike before, no one reacted. No likes, no comments, no engagement whatsoever. No one cared anymore. The news spread quickly after that. Vincent had been fired. A cousin confirmed that his law firm had finally let him go after multiple warnings about his attitude and poor handling of clients. It wasn't a sudden decision. His firm had been keeping an eye on him for months, and losing a major client had sealed his fate. His downfall had been a slow, self-inflicted disaster that everyone could see coming except him. With no job, Vincent's online presence became even more erratic. His once carefully curated social media, filled with posts about his high-powered career and perfect life, transformed into vague messages about betrayal, starting over, and how loyalty means nothing anymore. Unlike before, where he would get engagement from family and acquaintances, his posts were now met with deafening silence. The people who once validated his every thought had moved on, and he was left shouting into the void. Then came perhaps the most ridiculous part of this whole saga. His parents, who had spent years enabling his arrogance and treating him like he could do no wrong, started reaching out, not to him, but to my parents. They asked if I could help Vincent get back on his feet. Maybe I had connections in the corporate world? Maybe I could find him something suitable? After all, family helps each other, right? My response was simple. Not my problem. That was the last time the topic was brought up in my house. Meanwhile, Vincent's ex-fiancée was moving on publicly and happily. A few days after Vincent lost his job, she posted pictures from a vacation with her new boyfriend. The difference was obvious to anyone who saw the photos. She looked relaxed and carefree. There was no forced perfection, no need to maintain an image. She had completely detached from the mess Vincent had created and was living her best life without him. Shortly after those posts went public, Vincent disappeared from social media for a few days. There were no vague messages, no attempts to frame himself as the victim. Just silence. But silence didn't mean change or acceptance. It was just a brief pause in his downward spiral. Vincent started reaching out to old friends, pretending as if nothing had happened. He sent messages acting as if he hadn't spent years looking down on them, ignoring them, treating them as if they were beneath him. Some didn't bother responding at all. Others sent polite but brief replies before cutting the conversation short. He had burned too many bridges over the years, and now that he needed those same people, they weren't interested in helping him. The next family gathering happened soon after. For the first time in as long as anyone could remember, Vincent wasn't invited. No one even debated whether to include him. There was no discussion, no last-minute decision. He was simply left out. It was an unspoken agreement among everyone that things were better without him there. The gathering went smoothly, with no passive-aggressive remarks or unnecessary tension. Conversations were natural and relaxed. It was the kind of family event that hadn't existed in years. A few days later, a cousin mentioned that Vincent had applied for a job at a different law firm. It wasn't a prestigious one, not the kind he used to brag about. It was a lower-paying position, a significant step down from everything he had claimed to be in the past, and he was rejected. His reputation in the legal community had apparently preceded him. Then the final attempt came in the form of a long, rambling message that landed in my inbox. Vincent blamed me for everything: losing his job, losing his fiancée, being cut off from the family. He accused me of turning people against him, of humiliating him on purpose. He painted himself as the victim, acting as if I had personally orchestrated his downfall rather than simply allowing him to face the consequences of his own actions and attitude. I didn't respond. I blocked him instead. That was the moment it became final. No more second chances, no more connections. Whatever relationship had existed before, cousin, rival, family member, was gone. The relief among the family was noticeable. Some relatives admitted they had been waiting for this moment for years. Without Vincent stirring up conflict and competition, things felt easier, more natural. His mother, refusing to accept reality, kept making excuses. She told people he was taking time to reflect, as if this was some sort of planned sabbatical rather than the complete collapse of his carefully constructed facade. But no one believed her anymore. They had seen too much. His father, on the other hand, seemed to have finally seen the truth. At one of the last family events, someone quietly asked if Vincent was okay. His father just sighed and said, "He did this to himself." There was no defense, no sugarcoating, just the sad acknowledgement of what everyone already knew. After that, Vincent started fading from view. His once daily social media posts became rare. He stopped trying to reclaim his former image, realizing that no one was paying attention anymore. With him completely out of my life, I kept moving forward, and I had no intention of looking back or checking up on him. Months passed, and just when it seemed like Vincent had finally learned his lesson, he attempted a comeback. He started posting on social media again, acting as if nothing had happened. Gone were the bitter rants and vague complaints about betrayal. Now his posts were all about personal growth and moving forward. He shared motivational quotes, talked about learning from failures, and even started posting career tips. Despite the fact that he had lost his once prestigious job and hadn't secured a new one of similar standing. But no one cared anymore. His posts barely got any engagement. The family had completely moved on from the drama. Where once his updates would be met with admiration and praise, now they were mostly ignored. A few distant acquaintances liked a couple of his posts out of politeness, but the people who truly knew him, his former inner circle, stayed silent. They had seen behind the curtain and couldn't unsee it. Vincent's new reality was unavoidable. He no longer had the high-paying job, the admiration of his peers, or the fiancée he once flaunted at every opportunity. The prestige he had spent years carefully building had crumbled, and now he was left trying to piece together something from the wreckage of his reputation. At the next family gathering, his parents showed up without him. It was the first time in years that they had attended a family event without making excuses for Vincent or trying to paint him as the golden child who could do no wrong. When someone subtly brought up Vincent's situation, his father just sighed and said, "He did this to himself." That was it. No defense, no sugarcoating, just the plain truth that everyone had known all along. Not long after, it was confirmed through the family grapevine that Vincent had taken a job at a much smaller law firm. The salary was a significant step down from what he used to brag about, and the position wasn't anywhere near as prestigious as his former role. A cousin who still worked in the same industry mentioned that Vincent had been humbled by how few options he had. He had spent years acting as if he was irreplaceable, and now he was learning the hard way that he wasn't. The family had moved past him entirely. Conversations no longer included him, not even in passing. When his name did come up, it was in a vague, dismissive way, like an afterthought, not someone worth discussing in any depth. Then came his last desperate move. Even though I had already blocked him on my main accounts, he tried interacting with my social media in other ways. He started liking comments from mutual acquaintances and responding to posts made by relatives who still spoke to me, almost as if he was trying to get my attention indirectly. It didn't work. I wasn't interested in playing whatever game he was attempting to start. Frustrated by his failure to regain anyone's attention, he made one last bitter post. A long-winded message about how people only support you when you're at the top and how some family members are only happy when they see you fail. Instead of generating sympathy, it completely backfired. The comment section wasn't filled with concern or support. It was filled with mockery. People called him out, reminding him of how he had treated others over the years. Some just left laughing emojis. A few relatives who had kept quiet until now openly told him that he had no one to blame but himself for his current situation. Realizing he was only embarrassing himself further, Vincent deleted everything. His entire attempt at reclaiming his image vanished overnight. Then came his final attempt at contact. He asked a cousin to pass a message to me, saying that we needed to talk. The cousin didn't even hesitate before responding, "Dude, he does not care about you anymore. Move on." That was the last anyone heard of Vincent trying to reconnect. He finally faded into obscurity, no longer trying to force himself back into the family dynamic. No more desperate posts, no more bitter messages, just silence. Meanwhile, I focused on the people who actually mattered. I hosted a dinner with the relatives who had been supportive throughout everything. A real gathering with no competition, no passive-aggressive remarks, no pressure to prove anything. Just genuine conversation and laughter. Vincent had spent years trying to control how the family saw him. He had built his entire life around status, around making sure he was always seen as being at the top. But in the end, none of it mattered. Now he was nothing more than a bad memory, and I was thriving, surrounded by people who actually cared about me as a person rather than what I could do for their image or ego.